I'm Jason Tyler, First Vice Chair of the Economic Club of Chicago. We're all joining here today to hear from our guest speaker, J.B. Pritzker, Governor of the great state of Illinois. One important note, this program is going to be live on multiple platforms and on the Economic Club YouTube channel. So we ask that during the program you remain seated and the room stay quiet while we're broadcasting. Now, on to our program. Our moderator today is Chris Jones, the editorial page editor and chief theater critic at the Chicago Tribune and Broadway critic for the New York Daily News, and an Economic Club member. At the Tribune, Chris oversees editorials and op-eds on local, national, and international issues and comments on culture, the arts, politics, and entertainment. Chris has been known to say that in Chicago, politics is theater. An author and professor, he's taught at DePaul and Northern Illinois universities and is the author of several books, including Bigger, Brighter, Louder, showcasing early reviews of actors and shows and Rise Up, Broadway and American Society from Angels in America to Hamilton. A native of Manchester, England, Chris was educated in the UK and received his PhD in arts and theater from The Ohio State University. Now, on to our guest speaker. You have probably seen the coverage of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker taking his daily 5-mile walks along the lakefront. It's a view his ancestors can scarcely have imagined when, in 1881, his great-grandfather, Nicholas Pritzker, emigrated from Kiev to Chicago and worked as a pharmacist, later becoming a lawyer. So began the journey of one of the most entrepreneurial and philanthropic families in the United States. Born in Palo Alto, California, J.B. was named after his paternal uncles Jay and Robert, by his parents Donald Pritzker, who was president of the Hyatt hotel chain, and his mother, reproductive rights advocate Sue Sandell Pritzker. Both died tragically young, and at age 12, J.B. went to live with his beloved Aunt Cindy, who passed away earlier this year at the age of 101, as well as his Uncle Jay. He earned a BA in political science from Duke in 1987, and in 1993 a JD from Northwestern, just as the internet was taking hold. Over his career, he stood at the intersection of technology, finance, and entrepreneurship, co-founding what has become the Pritzker Group, spanning private capital and venture investing, founding New World Ventures, helping build the Chicagoland Entrepreneur Center, launching 1871, co-founding Chicago Ventures, and backing Techstars Chicago. As governor, he's championed the development of the Illinois Quantum and Microeconomics Lab Park, IQMP, on the former U.S. Steel Southworks site on Chicago's South Side. A lifelong Democrat, J.B. became Illinois' 43rd governor in 2018 in a race against former Governor Bruce Rauner. And he was reelected in 2022. Despite speculation to the contrary, J.B. has announced his plans to run again for governor in November of 2026, which is something we will need to ask him about. No stranger to many of you here today, J.B. is an Economic Club member, past club board member, and served as first vice chair of the Programs Committee of the Executive Committee. Thanks for being such a tough predecessor. Please welcome to the Economic Club of Chicago, Chris Jones, and Governor J.B. Pritzker of our great state of Illinois.
Good afternoon, everybody. Governor.
Good afternoon.
It's very nice to be here with you. It's very nice to see so many people here. This is a great honor for me to get to talk to you in this kind of forum, and I'm excited to ask you a few questions.
I love that you're a former theater critic, and I expect a lot of criticism.
So I wanted to start with a question that involves, it's a question about the odds. So I thought I'd ask it from one blackjack player to another blackjack player. There is
long odds
of different scales, I might add. But there's some rumor in the city that the Democratic National Convention might not go through its usual process there being a lot to do and might just return to Chicago. So I wanted to ask you what the over-under was on that. And also, if it does return to Chicago, what's the over-under on you being the nominee?
It's a unique way of asking a question. First, I'm really proud of, I hope all of you are too, of the execution of the Democratic National Convention back last year. What I'm most proud of is that this city shined. We showed off the best of the city, even with some difficult challenges around protests. But people who left here, and I've run into quite a number of them around the country, really left with an impression of a great city. It is a great city, and an impression of great people who live here, and a beautiful place for people to come back and visit, maybe even move their businesses here. So I was very proud of what we did last year. I have turned around and talked to the Democratic National Convention folks just to say, don't know if everybody is on board yet, but I wanted to make sure that we had our hat in the ring for the idea that they might come back in 2028. And for those of you who think that's not possible, just so you know, there's only really one city in the entire country that has had multiple conventions in a row, and that's the city of Chicago. And we've had more conventions than any other state. So I'm hopeful that they will, in fact, and that we will be able to host them again. But again, it takes a lot of organization. There's a whole lot between here and there. I just didn't want the convention folks to think that we're not in the running for 2028. More business, more people coming here. That's a great thing for the city and for the state.
And the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, I'm running for governor of Illinois.
I wanted to ask you about something you said to me before you got into politics, actually. Right before you began your first gubernatorial campaign, you said that you intended to be a happy warrior, which I took as meaning that you would appreciate the joys and the possibilities of the job even as you fought in the political arena. Are you still a happy warrior right now?
I am. I don't think if you didn't love the job, if I didn't love the job, I don't think I could be a happy warrior, because a warrior we have to be at this moment. And I love the city, I love the state. I believe we have so much to accomplish here, and we've been on the path of doing that. And so, when we're accomplishing things, it gives me joy. And when we're holding back the challenges and defeating them, that also gives me joy. So, but yes, I'm a happy warrior. And I've said that a couple of times, and I guess somebody actually created independently a account on Twitter that's called Nomadic Warriors for Pritzker. I don't exactly know. I mean, there is a description of the reference. I'm not sure why they started it, but maybe Happy Warriors for Pritzker is next.
And then early in your first term, you said to me that one of the things you'd figured out as governor was that Chicago, to some degree, took care of itself. It had all of this oxygen, all of this energy around it, and your job, a large part of your job, was looking after the Quad Cities or Peoria or a downstate, and bringing attention to what's going on there. And yet we've found in the political arena, thanks to what's going on in Washington, that Chicago is like the epicenter of all of these things. So has that caused you to shift your focus?
I don't know that I said it quite the way you heard it, but I don't think Chicago takes care of itself. I do think it's a great city. It's a great global city, and we should be really proud of it. But as governor of the state, I represent all the people of the state, 20% of whom live in the city of Chicago. Chicago is, of course, an economic engine for the state, and so it needs to be nurtured in that regard. But I feel like I serve equally across the state, and I think that's maybe disappointing sometimes to people who live in Chicago or in the surrounding area, that I also have to focus on, and do focus on, Decatur and Quincy and Carbondale and lots of places that you may not have heard of or from. But it's a big state, 57,000 square miles of a state. And most of the state is farmland and rural area, 75% of it. And there are lots of people who live across the state in those areas. And so, yeah, my job is to represent all of them and indeed to lift up the economy of those places too. It's important that Decatur does well and Springfield does well, and Quincy. And, you know, that again, I know that a lot of people who live here in Chicago don't often think of Central Illinois or Southern Illinois, but they are vital to the future and success of our state.
Let me ask you some questions about sort of the national political scene. Some of your Democratic friends say Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, being one example at this very club, has sort of said that Democrats have lost the plot and the country, and they should focus not on the language of identity politics, but on attracting swing voters, being moderate, being in the middle. You seem to have gone in the other direction, or made a deliberate choice to go in a more progressive direction, setting yourself, defining yourself as a resistor to the administration in Washington. For example, you marched in the No More Kings rally this very weekend, and you've become something. And this has attracted lots of attacks, of course, from the right. Why did you make that choice? Should not the next president be a healer who will bring, whoever the next president may be, but should that next president not be a healer who would bring the country together from the center?
Look, I'm fighting for the Constitution. I'm fighting for democracy. There's nothing more American than that. And there's nothing more centrist than that, to be honest with you. I mean, that is who we are as a country. I think most people, you know, despite the fact that the occupant of the Oval Office doesn't seem to believe that most people believe that we should be following the law, that we should not have a corrupt administration, that we should be trying to lift people up and not tear them down, that a political opponent is not an enemy of the country. So that's what I stand for. The labels that people want to put on people. Look, here's what I think. I think that we should be standing up for the working class, the middle class, the most vulnerable. I think that's what Democrats have always done. We're the party that created Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. We're the party that created the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And I think we should be standing up for all of those things. And also, we ought to be thinking about how do we shape a future for the country that does that. Not just the programs that I believe we should be preserving, like the ones I mentioned, and the laws that we should be preserving, but also, what are we going to do about AI? How is AI going to affect the working class and the middle class and you know, the people who are already, we've seen companies announcing that they're going to be laying people off because of AI. And so how does the future look for those people? What are they going to do in this world of you know, a new superhuman intelligence that's going to exist? And so that, I think, these are problems that I think Democrats are uniquely qualified to think about. I mean, my own view is that Republicans are not thinking about how to affect positive change for the people who are going to lose their jobs because of AI. And there's some profound differences between our parties. The thing that I think Democrats failed to do is, and I think this is a problem that pervaded the 2024 election, although there were some peculiarities, let's face it, of the 2024 election that have nothing to do with ideology. But the thing that Democrats, I think, failed to do was to stick to the message. Instead, you know, and it's the job of the other party to get you off message and get you talking about things that are not your, you know, foundation of your party and what the foundation of the country.
What would the message? What do you mean by the message exactly?
I'm just saying that we're, again, I became a Democrat because I think we ought to be fighting for people's individual rights. I think that we ought to be fighting for people's individual freedom. I think we ought to be fighting for the middle class and the working class and the most vulnerable. These are things, again, that if I don't wake up in the morning and think about that every single day, I'm not doing it right, not being a Democrat the way that I should be. And I do think about that. And I think that in the 2024 elections, it became about other things. And I think that's in part because Democrats got off message, but it's also because Republicans, smart politics, I guess, by Donald Trump, but set a bunch of traps that some Democrats walked right into. And I think we got to stop doing that. We've got to make sure that we're focused on what really matters. And you know, what makes America great is actually the people that I just talked about, right? It's the people who go to work every single day and build this country. And I don't think that that is what the 2024 elections were really about. People were thinking about other things when they walked into the voting booth. And we Democrats need to make sure they're thinking about the things that I think will really matter to their futures.
So Kristi Noem criticized you yesterday for, quote, trying to demonize federal immigration agents and the Trump administration's enforcement operations. And she said citizens should thank law enforcement officers and, quote, cook a meal for their families. I would imagine you would say the same if that was state police. Should not immigration agents be treated the same?
I think that we should thank law enforcement officers for the job that they do, if that's what she's implying. And I do that every single day. And indeed, I'm somebody who, I do not believe in defunding the police. I'm somebody who has built the police. Our state police are stronger and larger today than they were when I took office. And I followed a Republican governor under whom the Illinois State Police was diminished. And so, I'm a believer that, but that's not the only way to fight crime, by the way. But putting that aside, Kristi Noem breaks the law every day in the job that she does. So this is not somebody I want to listen to. And the only thing I disrespect are people who don't follow the law. Not the only thing, but the thing about what she said is I really believe that when ICE is tackling 15-year-olds because they're brown-skinned, when they're stopping a woman, I don't know if you saw this video, who was just walking out of the city of Waukegan City Hall. I think she had just paid a parking ticket or something inside, and she's just getting in her car, U.S. citizen. And she's literally being harassed by and then detained by and thrown into the back of an ICE vehicle, again, because she's brown-skinned. This is not the country that I grew up in, and I can tell 100 stories like that. I think all of you could too now. She oversees that, Kristi Noem. And then she cosplays an agent. You know, when she puts on the hat and puts on the uniform, she's never trained to do any of that, but she gets in the vehicle with them like she's going to somehow go and arrest somebody herself. She doesn't know any of that. She's never trained at all for any of the job that she's doing today. She was governor of South Dakota. I think that's a respectable background for a lot of things, but not for Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So I honestly don't take any of her criticism seriously at all. She is simply a lackey of Donald Trump's, and any criticism that the president endures from me, she takes offense to and wants to say something back to me, and this is what she came up with.
So it is true that 40%, 45% of Illinoisans in the last election did vote for Donald Trump in their presidential election. I wanted to quote something that John Fetterman said, I think just last week. He said of those people, they're not fascists, they're not Nazis, they're not trying to destroy the Constitution. Extreme rhetoric will make it more likely that there will be extreme outcomes and political violence. Would you agree with Senator Fetterman?
I hope that Senator Fetterman said that to the President of the United States, because we are, again, political opponents are not the enemy within. We are not Antifa. We are not terrorists. These are all things that the President has said. The President of the United States. So the criticism, I think, it's hard, of course, when you're the target of that kind of attack, right? And that is fomenting political violence. When, the rhetoric encourages people who might want to commit a crime like that. And when you're the object of that from the President of the United States, I could say, at least for me, it's very, very hard to, just say, well, that's okay. Let me offer some rational criticism back. It's hard to do. I try to do it every day. That is, when he's criticizing me, if I have to criticize back, I try not to make it, something that's so harsh that it would incite people. Yeah. But I have to say that they've created an environment, this administration that is arresting people for the color of their skin, that has cost people, businesses, their livelihoods because of tariffs, that act irrationally and has created instability geopolitically across the world. It's hard not to feel like we've got to have profound change in this country, and that they're not acting in a way that is so hyper unusual that it has to be called out in, maybe ways that other administrations have never been called out. I dream of the days that we could replace this Republican president with one that I criticized mightily, and that's George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or Ronald Reagan. I think those are the good old days of the Republican Party, when we could just have a lot of disagreement about how to get things done. This president is breaching the Constitution virtually every day. He's never lived up to any agreement that he's ever made, it seems. He goes, remember when he was in business, he ended up in court because people had to sue him just to get him to live up to his end of a contract. And we don't expect that he would do the same thing as President of the United States. That's exactly what he's doing now. That's why, you see that I stand up and I speak out about it, and that I'm not willing, he begs me to call him to have a conversation with him when I know that the conversation that he wants is for me to beg him to send National Guard onto the streets of the city of Chicago. I will never do that. Never.
So one critique of you, long-standing, I suppose, is that your political ambitions have ended up putting, or maybe even just speaking out in that way, has put Chicago more in the Trump crosshairs, if you like, and has rained down more ICE agents, more Border Patrol agents on our heads. And we do see in the university...
You think because of my criticism?
The argument that
Donald Trump has been dissing Chicago for many years before I ever became governor. This man has some weird idea in his head about the city of Chicago. This is truly one of the great cities, and I think he just can't get it out of his head that there's something going on. It's all on fire in Chicago. He says the same thing about Portland. I don't know about Portland. I know about Chicago. City's not on fire. Indeed, things are better today than they were 5-7 years ago. And, is it perfect? No, we've got a lot of work to do. That's why I like the job that I have. There's more to do, and we're accomplishing a lot. But I'm sorry I had to interrupt you, but he has this idea. No, I'm not going to just sit back while he's, literally turning this country into a dictatorial regime.
I do think, Governor, there are probably business people in this room who are wondering how to navigate the Trump administration. And if we look at the university sector, you do see universities that have had, on the one hand, in public, they've opposed the president, they've stood up against him, Harvard being a good example of that. Whereas in private, they've had Republican lawyers making deals with the administration, and they've operated, in some cases, on twin tracks. If you look at, for example, Tim Cook at Apple, who has sort of made nice with Donald Trump, and if Tim Cook enjoys being with Donald Trump, you and I sitting here on two blue ponies, I doubt that he did, but he nonetheless did that, and yesterday Apple stock hit a high, all-time high. Do you think that argument has any merit, given that the federal government, I guess I'm asking you this partly as a business person too, but does that argument have any merit given how many levers the federal government has to pull on a state, but also on a private business?
Look, I understand that businesses are risking something when they stand up against taking away people's rights, as Donald Trump is doing, when they stand up against having ICE on the streets, CBP marching with their automatic weapons down Michigan Avenue. When you stand up and speak out, you are going to be subject to the criticism and the whims of a very vindictive president of the United States. I get that. But what are our alternatives? Do we, as happens in other authoritarian regimes, Do we just give in and let it all happen, which, by the way, would lead to troops on the streets, troops possibly being on the streets for the elections in 2026? I mean, in ways that none of us have ever seen anything like that. But that is what would happen if we all just sat back and let it happen. And I mean, yeah, there are business people who've gone and cut deals and universities that have cut deals. I'm saying people need to stand up. This is the moment for people to stand up. I do not understand why people will give in when their rights are being taken away for some extra cash. We have to save this country from what Donald Trump is doing to it, because no, I do not want this country to become like other authoritarian regimes. People have criticized me for talking about the Nazi regime. On the right, people have criticized me. It's the one I know most about because I helped to build a Holocaust museum, and I can tell you, sitting next to Holocaust survivors, that what they will say in this moment is, this is what happened. This is what happened. People's rights started getting taken away. People got accused of being immigrants. This is before the Holocaust really took place. People were accused of being immigrants, and then laws were passed to limit immigrants, and then people who weren't actually immigrants were called immigrants, and then it was othering people, and that led to a lot worse things. What I'm saying is that this is how authoritarian regimes do it. They create these kind of fake ideas that there's an enemy out there and it could be sitting next to you at one of these tables. And so just somebody at your table that you don't like might be one of those enemies. And so let's round them up. Let's make sure that they are the subject of the laws that we're passing because we don't like who they are. That is what authoritarian regimes do. And I have to say, you know, I can't not speak out about that. How can I not? And businesses, and you know, when you have choices, there's a woman who just put a sign outside of her chocolate store in Chicago, and it says, "All are welcome, but not ice." And what she's trying to say, of course, is that, you know, we don't want a country where you've got people getting stopped and asked for their proof of citizenship because of the color of their skin. And she's, what do you know, the subject of criticism. People are going online and giving her 1 star on Yelp, you know, people who are followers of Donald Trump, just because of all of that. And by the way, thank you, people of Chicago, her business has gone up 20%. People need to, however you can, people need to stand up against it. Look, if he's willing to live by the rules, if he's willing to do what I think is in the great tradition of the United States and just stand up for people's rights and, you know, and actually protect people, I think we should all work with them. You know, that's what we've done with other, you know, federal administrations. But this is not a moment for that. This is a moment when literally everything is on the line. And I think you saw, what did we see, 16, 17 million people around the country go out and protest last weekend because they understand. They understand.
Let me, before we get into some state issues, let me ask you one thing about immigration enforcement. We know that many progressives favor open borders, or at least oppose any kind of criminal penalty for immigration violations. I believe you've said that the nation should have immigration laws. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said that. And Barack Obama, for example, used to always cite his commitment to the rule of law when he was deporting people. There was a raid at Swaporama that got a lot of attention. Well, there was also a raid under Barack Obama in 2013 at that same location. And he would say, once you don't enforce a law, then you undermine all laws. And maybe that's why this is such a difficult issue for Democrats. So I don't think there's anybody in this room, I imagine, very few people who would like ICE methods as we are seeing them in Chicago.
Right.
And I think there's general agreement that we don't want violent criminals in the city either. But my question is, if somebody has received a final deportation order from a judge, if that's the case, should that be enforced through arrest and deportation?
You know, there's so much in that question that I disagree with. It's hard to almost answer that. The premise of it, it starts with that anybody who's progressive is for open borders.
Well, some people are.
Well, I'll tell you that Democrats are not for open borders. I think that, we are not. Look, you don't have a country if you don't have a border. So we have borders for reasons, and there's nothing wrong with having a border. And what's wrong is that we haven't had comprehensive immigration reform that would allow somebody who, and I think we all know somebody like this, who is in this country, however they ended up in the country, undocumented, been here for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, maybe raised a family here, has held a job and paid their taxes, and have followed the law their entire time here. And they're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're people who serve you when you go into a restaurant, or they're running a place themselves. These are people that I believe that these are the exact people that we should be inviting into the country. They're already here. Why can't we have a system that says those people can stay? And if you're committing a violent crime, if you are someone who doesn't belong here because you are violating the laws, then you shouldn't be here, and especially those who have committed violent crimes. I don't want them in my state. I don't want them in the country. But people who are following the laws and paying taxes and they're good neighbors, let's keep them here. What is ICE doing? Please go after the worst of the worst. That is not what they're doing. The president said he was going after the worst of the worst. ICE says they're going after the worst of the worst. You think that kid who got zip-tied, the little kids who were zip-tied at that South Shore building, you think those are the worst of the worst? The woman that came out of the city of Waukegan City Hall, she's a U.S. citizen who did nothing wrong. And there are plenty of examples of that. That is what my objection is with what they're doing. My objection is not having an immigration enforcement mechanism. My objection is the way they're doing it. They are breaking all of the protocols and rules that normally apply to police in this country. And we're just sitting back and allowing it to happen is not right. So I'm a believer in enforcing the law, and I'm also a believer in enforcing a border. And I criticized President Biden. I wrote a public letter about it when it was happening during his administration, that we needed to do more, and that the federal government, if we're going to let all these people in and they're showing up in Chicago and in Illinois, the federal government's got to help us out more. And they didn't do enough, and they didn't do enough at the border. I mean, we had a real problem, and we needed to do something about the border, but now we need to do something about the people who work for you and work for other people who are here and law-abiding, doing the right thing, and they want to be good Americans. They want a path towards staying in this country, whether we call it citizenship or just legal residency. We need to give them that path, and we're not doing it today. And the Republicans have never proposed this under Donald Trump. He wants to do something about immigration. He should have come into office, and right away he had control of the House and the Senate. The presidency could have passed immigration reform. Instead, while he was the candidate for the Republicans, he opposed the bill that Democrats and Republicans were willing to vote for, the one that was proposed by Lankford to keep the border safe and to do something about people who are inside this country.
Let's move on to some state and local issues, if we may.
Okay. I was hoping we'd get there. Yeah.
One of your signatures has been attracting new businesses to Illinois, corporate headquarters, that kind of thing. The city of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, just released a budget that contains at least two major new taxes on big corporations: head taxes, albeit by another name, and cloud computing taxes. That would appear to make your job of attracting new businesses to the city of Chicago harder. Should city council reject those new taxes on big corporations?
I don't want to talk about the cloud tax because I don't know enough about what the details are. I am absolutely foursquare opposed to a head tax for the city of Chicago. It penalizes it penalizes the very thing that we want, which is we want more employment in the city of Chicago. And it makes it very hard to attract companies from outside of Chicago to come into Chicago, and harder for companies that are in Chicago to stay. And we're a state that had a bad reputation. And when I came into office, and I've spent 6.5 years trying to turn that reputation around, balance our budgets, attract businesses, create incentives for businesses, cut taxes, do everything that I could possibly do to attract new businesses and to keep businesses here, not just here, but growing here, expanding here. When they decide they want to do something new, I want them to do that here and not say, well, yeah, we've got our facility here, but the next facility we're going to build somewhere else. So that's, I think, all of our jobs in government, right? We need more jobs. And FYI, you're talking, this is in the context of trying to balance a budget. There are three things and knobs you can turn, let's say, to balance a budget, right? One of them is you can cut expenditures. Another one is you can raise taxes, raise revenues that way. And the third one, and this is the one I prefer, is grow the economy, because your revenues increase if you grow the economy, right? And it helps you pay for the things that you think really matter. And so those are all three knobs that can be turned, but the economic growth one is the best for everybody. And so I think we ought to be focused on that most of all. But you got to balance the budget, there's no doubt about it. I prefer growing the economy to the other two methods. I think efficiencies are hugely important, by the way. It's not to suggest that cutting expenditures is always a bad idea. Indeed, I hate to tell you, what Donald Trump has done to all of the states now is forced us, because he's foisted upon us new expenditures that used to belong to the federal government. Now the states are going to have to pay for a lot of that. And that's, for the state of Illinois, that's going to turn into several $billion that they are foisting upon us as things like SNAP and Medicaid. They're going to cost us more as a result of what he's done. So we're going to have to make, serious changes to the way we do things. And I just want to say, balancing the budget for the state of Illinois, for the city of Chicago, vital, can't be ignored, has to be done, shouldn't be done with a head tax in the city of Chicago.
Let's talk about the so-called sweetener of the so-called pension sweetener that you passed that for the city of Chicago, for the firefighters and so on, that the city has estimated will cost $11 billion over the next 3 decades. You said when you passed it, I quote, "One thing to consider is the finances of the city of Chicago. How will they pay for it?" I think most people in this room would probably say with great difficulty at this point. And if you look at the police and the fire pension funds, I think they're funded at, 25%. The city says under this it would go down to 18%. So you landed Chicago, some people would say, with an unfunded mandate, let's call it. Why did you pass that?
Well, again, I want to try to reform some of the language that you just used. For example, the idea that, first of all, I did not pass it. It gets passed by 177 people.
You signed it, Governor.
Yeah, but folks, it got passed nearly unanimously with a veto-proof majority. So let me just point that out when it landed on my desk. Number two, it was not a sweetener. You call it a sweetener. It was not a sweetener. These are the things that were promised to police and promised to firefighters. We already delivered for the firefighters. Are we not going to deliver for the police? And by the way, these are people I think all of us believe deserve to be paid what they've been promised. They do an unbelievably hard job, and they deserve it. It was not a sweetener. It was something that they were owed. And the city of Chicago has acknowledged that over many, many years. And one more thing, not a single time during the entire legislative session when this was being debated did the city of Chicago weigh in with their view. I'm talking about from January to May, we heard not a peep from the city of Chicago on this subject. So, the idea that the city was opposed to doing this and that the state did something that the city government didn't want to have done, I don't think is fair. It's not, and once again, you know, a veto-proof majority, nearly unanimous in the legislature, Republicans and Democrats voted for this because they believe, as I do, that when you're promised a pension, you deserve to get it.
But you feel confident that Chicago won't find itself in a situation where it can't pay its bills and go through some kind of Detroit situation or anything like that. Do you feel confident this city can handle all of this?
It shouldn't look at, it starts with balance. I had this problem at the state. I showed up and, you know, we had $17 billion of unpaid bills, overdue bills. And I think the days payable was like 250 days payable when I came in with $17 billion owed. We're now, FYI, at about 15 days payable, which I've told the comptroller is a little too fast. Maybe 30 days is okay, you know. But look, I understand balancing a budget is really hard, and paying off debt is really hard. We've done that. We paid literally, I think we're at $12 or $13 billion of debt that we paid off, in addition to balancing the budget over the last 6.5, seven budgets. We had no, as of the end of the fiscal year, we had no short-term debt in the state. We paid off all the short-term debt that we had. We have long-term debt, pensions being one of them, which we're continuing, and I've paid more into the pension system than is required by law because we need to get there faster, and we've done a few other things, which I'll talk about our pensions. But for the city of Chicago, same thing. You got to balance the budget. When you balance the budget, if you can run surpluses, you can use that money to pay off old debts, to try to reduce your pension liability, or at least put money into the pension system in order to reduce the liability. That's just how you do it. And and we have obligations. You got to live up to the obligations. You can't walk in. I know people said this about the state. We should pass a pension amendment, which, by the way, would be unconstitutional and was ruled as such. But these are things that you're obligated to do when you're in office, even when it's hard.
And you're confident that this city can do it?
I am confident the city can do it. Look, you got to start with efficiencies. You got to go into city government, and I haven't seen any of that in this budget so far. I think that's going to have to happen because there are going to be changes. People are not going to like certain kinds of revenue enhancements that he's got in his budget. So I think you got to find efficiencies, and there are efficiencies to be found. Some of them, with just technology. Some of them because we've got departments that do things that maybe we don't need done. And then just finally, how about we do our best to attract and retain and grow businesses in the city of Chicago? Because that, again, the best way for us to pay the bills.
Let me ask you about electoral maps in Illinois for a sec. A couple of very distinguished Illinoisans walked into our office to talk about reform when it comes to those maps, saying that only 4% of Illinois state legislative races are competitive. In effect, they argued disenfranchising 96% of voters. They also argued that because so few races are competitive, that it inherently empowers the fringes on either side because there's less motivation to win over other voters. And it's true, when we've done electoral endorsements in non-competitive districts, we've sometimes found some of these candidates would appear non-serious to us, shall we say. So those arguments seem to be irrefutable. And the first thing I said to these distinguished gentlemen was, what does the governor say about that? And they sort of went quiet. And so I said, well, I'm interviewing the governor in a couple of weeks. I'll ask him. So what do you think about all that? I'm talking about Illinois, just to be clear, Illinois, state of Illinois.
But we don't exist by ourselves in the country. And I would point out that if you look in Texas before they redistricted just moments ago, and in Florida and in Tennessee, and let's move state by state by state, right? The idea that we should have fair elections and that we should have a map that's reflective, I agree. So guess what? In 2021, the Congress introduced a bill, Democrats introduced a bill, that would require independent commissions for every state, because you can't just do it in one state or another state when there are some states, mostly Republican states, In fact, it's all Republicans. Only Democratic states have put in independent commissions. So Republican states, as far as I know, and Republican states have passed maps that are also not reflective exactly of the population and their views. Let's have a national law that requires independent commissions in every state. Democrats introduced that. Democrats put all their votes on it. Republicans all voted against it. And it didn't become law. So, but you can't just pick and choose and say, well, this state, should do it and that state shouldn't, because guess what's happening in New York? They've got an independent commission, right? And you want to respond to what the Republicans are trying to do, what Donald Trump is trying to do by stealing seats, breaching the Voting Rights Act, I might add. And New York has an independent commission that they can't overcome in order to try to respond to that. I don't think any of it's good. I don't want to do it for the state of Illinois. I don't think we should redistrict here. I have to say, though, that we live in, the most dangerous times that I can remember when it comes to preserving our democratic institutions. They are breaking them down everywhere. What should we do? Should we just sit back and let it happen? What is it? I don't know what the right answer is, but I can tell you I'm not going to sit back and let it happen. I don't know that we should redistrict in Illinois, but I wonder if we should all say, well, it's okay, that Texas has done it, but it's not okay if California does it. And yeah, I don't like the results that you're describing either. I'll say one other thing, though, about bipartisanship, because in Illinois, and for as long as I can remember before 2019, maybe 2017, but as long as I can remember, Democrats and Republicans would talk to one another, would work on bills with one another, would pass things together. And I'm somebody who really believes that, some Republicans have really good ideas, and we should be working with them on those. And when I came into office, I felt like a good model for that was Governor Jim Thompson. And he worked across the aisle with people, and I think people respected him on both sides of the aisle. I certainly did. So I worked, the governor's mansion is a couple of blocks from the Capitol. And so I opened the governor's mansion at least once a week and had cocktail receptions and dinners with Republicans my first year in office. Very proud of that, very excited about that. And guess what? We got things done in a bipartisan fashion. They voted for a bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats voted for a bipartisan budget, voted for a bipartisan infrastructure bill. We did a whole bunch of things to attract businesses to the state in 2019. Something happened in 2020, and that was COVID. And the President of the United States turned everything into, using COVID, he weaponized COVID into a partisan issue. And that's the only thing I can point at the moment, because shortly after that happened, all of a sudden, Republicans didn't want to talk. Republicans didn't want to work together. And that's what it's been like from, essentially first half of 2020 to today. There are very few Republicans that are willing to sit down and talk. They're happy to show up at the ribbon cuttings that I host when we're launching great things for the state, but they're not willing to vote for a lot of it. And so I wish we had more bipartisanship, and I don't disagree that we are a country that is more divided than ever, and we need to do a lot of things about that.
Let me ask you about transportation. So one of the big issues going on in the state is transportation. We see a lot of fiscal problems with the transportation agencies. For example, we have a red line extension at the CTA that people are assessing now might cost $5 billion, nearly $6 billion. There's a federal component to that, but the amount of federal money is shrinking as the cost of that...
Went away altogether, actually, yeah.
Say again?
It was canceled, yeah.
Well, yes,
Federal
but even if
money
it came
canceled.
back,
Yeah.
it would be a small percentage of that. I just wanted to get your views on that specifically, and also on what Springfield should do about transportation in your mind.
Transportation has always been a federal and state issue, and local issue too. That is that we all put money in to make it work. It's always been that way, as long as I can remember. And so the idea that the federal government's basically walked away from an important project that really would bring the city closer together is a shame, truly a shame. Was it enough money? No, but prices went up from the time that money was approved to the time that it would be launched, that project. And so I get it, but that happened to everything. So all I can say is, yeah, you can't build it without the $2+ billion that was supposed to come from the federal government, because there's no way for the state to make up for the money, or Chicago to make up for the money. And that's true about a whole lot of things, I might add, that the federal government is walking away from. And it made promises, and it appropriated money, and it is under the law, and they walked away from these things. And they did it, so illegally, in my view, and they did it the President of the United States did it for partisan reasons only. That's what he's done across the country. It's been focus on Democrats. It's not just Illinois. All the way across the country, projects that were in Democratic states, and he says it now just out loud, straight up, that he's doing it purposely just to go after Democrats. So we need a better invested transportation system. This is hopefully where you were going next, which is, because there's one project, but then there's what are we going to do to support transit in
What are you going to do?
Chicagoland region? Well, it is a group effort, I might add. It is not just a state effort. We're not the only piece of this, right? The transportation systems themselves need to find efficiencies, and we've demanded that of them. We need reform in the way that it's governed, and that is going to be part of a bill. And counties and the city are contributors, along with the state. So it's not just what are you going to do about it, it's what are we going to do about it. I want a world-class transportation and transit system for the city of Chicago. We can't thrive without it. So we have to make the investments. Have to. There are people, mostly Republicans, who will not vote for paying for that. I don't know what you want me to say about that, but let's level some criticism where it belongs, because Democrats, at least, are talking about building a world-class system, finding efficiencies, governing better, and finding the resources. And guess what? That means you got to pay for it. Somebody's got to pay. We all have to pay. The riders have to pay. I mean, we want something great for this area, for this region, and for the rest of the state. There are transportation systems all across the state of Illinois that need to be upgraded. And that should be part of this. And I have insisted upon that from the very beginning. And it will be. It will be. So I'm in favor of it. I think we're going to have to make it happen soon. I'm hoping that it will happen. And I'm asking the legislature that they do it during the veto session, which is coming up. Well, we're in it now, but there's another week next week. And again, vital for all of the businesses of the state of Illinois, all of the economy of the state of Illinois is dependent on having great transportation systems.
Before we finish, I wanted to ask you about the Bears. Are you agnostic about the move to Arlington Heights, or are you sad to see them leave Chicago? And, maybe you can share where you're at. You've held the line against the state, coming up with lots of money for private entities like sports teams. Where are you at with that? You think that's all going to work out in Arlington Heights?
Well, I love the Bears, and I love them even more when they win. But that has nothing to do with my decision-making about, what the state will do with building stadiums. Let me start with the taxpayers should not be left on the hook for the debt that came from building Soldier Field. Second, it is a private business worth, well, now I guess we can actually value it because they sold shares in it at $9 billion valuation. So it's a $9 billion business with wealthy owners, private owners, I might add. And when companies come to the state of Illinois, all the time, private or public companies, they come to the state of Illinois and they want help to grow or build something new and big. We help. We help them with infrastructure. We help them in a lot of different ways. And I'm for that. We should help private businesses and public businesses grow in the state of Illinois. What I'm not for is that we're responsible for building your factory or we're responsible for building your new headquarters. We're not. We can help you. we'll build roads, we'll build, we'll help you with incentives. But so the Bears are a wealthy family owns them. It is a successful franchise, and we'll do for that business what we do for other businesses. But again, building a couple of $1 billion stadium for them, promising them that they won't pay any property taxes. We shouldn't do that. That is not good for the taxpayers, and that is what I have in mind every day, thinking about what we'll do for the Bears and for everything else. How are we going to build a better state, and how do we stand up for our taxpayers, and how do we lift up those who are most vulnerable? What the Bears want to do, they're a private business. They can choose to go anywhere they want. I would like them to stay in the city of Chicago, and I have suggested to them that they stay in the city of Chicago. It would be best for a lot of people if they would stay here. They are choosing not to. That's a choice that a private business, that any business can make. It's a private sector business. It's not up to the state to make that decision for them.
I have one very last question before we wrap up. For the reasons you've alluded to, I think, in this interview, and other reasons as well, a lot of people in Illinois and in Chicago finding life kind of tough. It's difficult. A lot of Illinoisans are in that position. You've always, going back to my happy warrior theme, you've always been an upbeat guy as long as I've known you. One of your great qualities, I've always thought. What can you offer Illinoisans when it comes to the quality of hope? It seems to me that when you live in a state, in a city, you want to be hopeful about the future for your kids. How do you find that right now with people are under all of this stress everywhere we look? What do you have to offer as governor where you can say, this is why you should stay here. This is what you should hope for?
Yeah. So again, I remind you that when I took office in 2019, this state faced, a whole raft of problems. And they were reputational problems, they were real problems, we're talking about pensions and crime and other things, right, that we were trying to overcome in the state, and it had been years since they had really been dealt with in any serious way. And when I came into office, just before I came in, some members of the business community would walk up to me and say, you don't want to be governor in the next few years because the state's going bankrupt. And you don't want to be the guy who's holding the hot potato. And I'm not just an optimist, I'm a realist. But I understood that we could make things better, and we have to. You can't declare bankruptcy as a state, by the way. But we can make things better, and we can do it, if we put shoulder to the wheel. So we've made a ton of progress. We have balanced the budget 7 years in a row. It hasn't been balanced for 20 plus years before that. Our pensions are in a better position today than they were when I took office. We've moved from like 39% funded to 48% funded. You might say, well, gee, that's not great. Well, it was going the other direction when I came into office. And I could give you, we have a rainy day fund. We never had a rainy day fund in Illinois, never. And we have a $2.5 billion rainy day fund. So I'm telling you these things because, and we've attracted businesses. We have more jobs in the state of Illinois than we've ever had before. Oh, let me give you another statistic. Sorry, now I'm on a roll. Let me give you another statistic, because I know there are a lot of people who think that our education system is terrible. Do you know that eighth graders, there's national tests, NAEP scores that are given to eighth graders on reading and math. When I took office in 2019, Illinois' eighth graders were 22nd in the nation for math among the 50 states, 22nd. Today, we're 5th in the nation in math. When I took office in 2019, we were at 15th in the nation for reading scores, 8th grade reading scores. We're now 2nd in the nation for 8th grade reading scores. And I'm not just picking statistics. We're ranked by U.S. News and by CNBC as one of the top 5 states, or one of the top states, maybe 7th, I think, in U.S. News, for for pre-K to 12 education, and we're I think number 2 in college readiness in Illinois, according to U.S. News. So, I mean, we have a lot to be proud of, and the trajectory of the state. You asked me, what do you have to be hopeful about? Well, because we're moving in the right direction, and we have overcome so much, and even with all the things that Donald Trump is doing to us, and doing to this nation, frankly, and to states across the country. Even with all of that, think about it. I was joking with my chief of staff the other day, not really a joke, but for 6.5 years I've been in office, and we were trying to count how many months during that time have we lived in precedented times. Because I would like to live through some more precedented times, everybody. But by the way, we counted about 8 months out of 6.5 years that have been precedented. Everything is like we had a budget crisis, we had COVID crisis, migrant crisis, Trump crisis. Everything, it's been quite challenging, but we're overcoming those things. And so that, I think, is what we have to be hopeful about, and that things are not nearly as bad as people, particularly people, I hate to say, there's a whole industry of people who want to, dump on Illinois. People in Illinois want to dump on Illinois for their political benefit, they think. And it is not nearly as bad as people think, and we're pretty darn good at a lot of things. And in part, it's because of all of you. You all are creating jobs, and you're growing the economy. And I don't say that just to flatter you because I'm on stage. I believe that we need to grow our economy. People, sometimes say, oh, Democrats, they're all socialists. There's some people who say that. I don't know, I'm a capitalist. I think that more money made by all of you, more jobs you create, that's good for everything about the state of Illinois. Let's keep growing that. Let's also stand up for the most vulnerable and the working class and the middle class. We can do all those things at the same time. Indeed, we are doing it.
Governor, thank you very much.
Thank you.